Hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Classic Gaming Brothers. I'm Seth.
And I'm Zach.
And we are the Classic Gaming Brothers.
We are the Classic Gaming Brothers.
And before we get into the episode, or even start the episode, I just wanted to thank Theo from the Gallant Goblin for coming on to our show last episode.
Yeah.
And if you're listening to this episode because you were a fan of Theo's and now you want to listen to our episodes to try to become a fan of ours, we're sorry.
Yeah, welcome aboard, and you picked a weird one to start with.
That's right. To be honest, most of them are weird.
Most of them are, well, they're going to get weirder.
So thank you, Theo. We appreciate your time coming onto the show, the conversation, and it was a great conversation, and we're definitely looking forward to collaborate with you and the Gallant Goblin in the future. And if you haven't yet, go check out Theo's channel. They really run a great ship over there called the Gallant Goblin, and they do unboxings and reviews of D&D products, primarily miniatures.
Yeah.
But it's great. They always do a very thorough job with their review. And I was mentioning, we were talking with Theo before and after the show, and I did mention that him and Grady really put together probably the most methodically constructed YouTube videos out there, and are just so well organized. It really comes across, and as it does, as just a really high production value. Once again, check out the Gallant Goblin, and thank you very much, Theo, for coming on to our show. And we really appreciate all of our guests that come on as we come along here, and it's great having guests and being guests, and it's fun just meeting and talking to people and creators that we wouldn't normally talk to in our daily life. So anyway, speaking of our daily life, so recently I have been playing a game called Nebuchadnezzar, such as the Mesopotamian ruler back from a long time ago. So Nebuchadnezzar was developed and published by Nepos and came out February 17th of 2021, which I think is the first game that was released in 2021 that we are talking about, possibly.
Nice. Hey, I don't know. I'm not going to hold you to it, though.
No, me neither am I.
That's our resident corrector-in-chief, Doug.
Doug,
he'll hold us to that.
Yes, Doug is our corrections editor. He's actually, we have an office that he works in, and whenever we get something wrong, he usually throws his hands up in the air and storms out.
Right, but it's his job to tell us after we've got it wrong. He doesn't proof anything.
He can't proof, nor can he interrupt the pod in progress. Once we put up the recording sign, we're immune to any of his rants. Though once the returning sign turns off, he just screams at us. It's really rough working for Doug, but
It is.
So Nebuchadnezzar is a spiritual successor to those of the Impressions games, such as Pharaoh, Caesar, Zeus, etc., and is a city builder type game and it definitely pulls that vibe of being a city builder set in ancient society. It brings in some mechanics that weren't in previous, like in the Impression games, such as some irrigation mechanics that are new, at least to me, and zoning essentially your farms and making sure that your farms are in close enough location to like warehouses, because if the buildings are too far away, they won't immediately work with each other. They have to be in kind of like a radius of operations kind of thing. Nebuchadnezzar so far for me has been a good city builder. I've probably played 2 or 3 hours of it so far. I got through most of the tutorial and I'm on to cities where they're just letting me do whatever I want finally. And it's good. I appreciate what they're doing with it. I really like the art style with it. It's more the art style is done similar to how the Impressions games were versus like a 3D type of situation. So, and I like that. The only thing that has me like my criticism to the game is that it doesn't necessarily feel like a living city. In the Impression games, if you played any of them, when you place down a building, people would emerge from that building and just wander. And you kind of had to direct them and make sure that they wandered in the right directions in order to improve the city. Like they had to pass by certain towns and stuff like that. And sometimes you made districts and zones in your city that you couldn't improve because it just wasn't feasible to get all of those people to wander over to that area, especially if you had like a far off mine or something like that, and you needed to staff it. Nebuchadnezzar doesn't have that type of wandering. Generally, people, if they're walking the city streets, they have a job and you probably also assigned them to the specific path that they can walk in. And you also can't click on anybody like your citizens, which was a hallmark of the impression games, where you could click on them and they would say something, which is something that I feel is a little lacking. I think that they're doing a good job, and I think that they're on the right path with the game. Though I feel like if they could add these things, it would make the game even better and closer to what they're going for the spiritual successor to those impression games. Though I did buy the game since I've been playing it, and I paid it retails right now at $19.99. I'm sure at some point in time it'll go on sale. But so if you like those city builder games, if you like them a lot, I'm playing it and I'm enjoying it. So there's that. If you're on the fence about it, you might want to wait for a sale. So there's been times where I've been really excited about a game and I've purchased it, and I have been sorely disappointed with the game. And that happens a lot with me. I don't feel that way about Nebuchadnezzar. I feel that
That's
it's
good.
still a fun game. I still like it. Feels very impression-y. I do hear the criticism and feel the criticism that they could make it a little more like the city's a little more alive. But apart from that, I think they did a good job with it. And I like it. I don't feel like I've wasted money, and I'll definitely play more of it. So I'm excited about it. So there's that. Nebuchadnezzar.
All right. So the game that I've recently been playing is called Super Painter. It came out in 2018 by our buddies over at Mega Cat Studios, who we actually had the chance to meet during our PAX trip, way back in episode 14 or so. We did our post-PAX pod where we talked about PAX, and we mentioned meeting Mega Cat Studios, so that was fun, or meeting some representatives from them. We didn't meet the entire studio. That would have been impressive. So Super Painter originally came out in 2018 for the original Nintendo, and you play as a character who goes by the name Super Painter, kind of like Super Mario, where you're trapped in this colorless world and you're armed with a paintbrush and you have to paint. The idea is you kind of paint in areas that are gray, and after you've painted in the arbitrary number of areas in a given map, you go to the next zone and repeat. So obviously the levels change. There's kind of some new and interesting puzzles. So the first few puzzles, everything's flat, and then they add in some vertical puzzles that you have to kind of like jump to get certain sections, and there's enemies that appear that you have to avoid. So a lot of fun different elements to it. I've been playing on the Evercade, which is a handheld system that came out about a year or so ago. I got my Evercade as a Christmas gift, and it's a portable handheld. I already said it's handheld, so it implies that it's portable.
You can only play it in one location.
Yes, that's right. It is a handheld system that has cartridges, which is kind of unique for a modern day video game handheld. It uses like proper cartridges. A lot of the cartridges they've been releasing have been compilation cartridges of different games, such as titles from the original Atari and titles from places like Mega Cat Studios. So I have a Mega Cat Studios cartridge which has Super Painter on it. I've just been popping it in and playing it every now and then. It's one of those games that you can kind of just play for a little bit and turn off if you get a game over, or if you kind of get a little tired of it. I personally don't find myself getting super tired of it playing it, but it's definitely one of those like time waster games, I would say, almost like back when you would play like Chips Challenge on the old Windows system, or Minesweeper or something like that, or Sokoban, where it's something that you can kind of do for a brief period of time just to kind of waste a little bit of time and see how high of a score you can get before you get a game over. And then by the time you get a game over, you'll probably be pretty much finished with playing it anyway. So today, we are going to be talking about some hardware. We're going back to our favorite company, Sega.
Yes, so Sega does what Nintendo don't.
That's right, except this time Sega did what Nintendo did, because we're talking about the Game Gear, Seth, which was Sega's answer to the Nintendo Game Boy.
Yeah, that was a thing.
It was a thing. We're also going to be talking a little bit about the Sega Nomad, which was not a thing. Well, it's not as big of a thing, I guess.
So Zach, let's talk about Sega Game Gear. Why don't you tell me about your memories that you've had?
I remember our father buying me. It might have been us. I just remember being there when I got it. A Sega Game Gear from the store Ames. I don't know anyone out there who might remember Ames, but there was an Ames in our hometown, and they were liquidating their Game Gear stock. So when you entered the Ames, they had, like, right by the entrance, just hundreds of Game Gears stacked up that they were just trying to get rid of. I assume because they weren't selling. Now, my father knew we were a Sega family, so we had to have the Sega system. So we picked up a Sega Game Gear, and I also got, I think it was Sonic the Hedgehog 2 for the Game Gear. which is separate from Sonic the Hedgehog 2 for the Genesis almost entirely, like whole different levels and such, and also got Disney's Aladdin for the Game Gear. So we bought those. I went home. I remember going home with this new console, like brand new in a box, which was like a first for me, having this like new console to myself sort of thing, and a copy of Disney's Aladdin. I think Sonic 2 we had to get 6 AA batteries for this thing, so I remember putting in the batteries and sitting down at the kitchen table, turning on Disney's Aladdin, and I played it for like probably about 2 hours, and then the system just turned off, and I was like, that's it, because it only lasted about 2 hours or so on battery. I actually still have my original Game Gear. It is missing its battery packs. I believe I can get 3D printed ones or like new old stock. So I could technically just get replacement battery packs. I am lazy and I haven't done that yet, but I might do that now that I'm thinking about it and have a nice little complete looking Game Gear. I could also actually swap out the screen and put a new proper battery, like a lithium-ion battery or something, but that would take some time and effort. So anyway, that's my memories with the Game Gear. Seth, what memories do you have about the Game Gear?
Well, before I get to my memories about my Game Gear, just so because I know we do have an audience that extends outside of the Northeast corridor. For those who are listening who have no idea what Ames is,
sorry.
It's kind of like a department store that generally were anchors in strip malls, kind of like a Walmart, or I think more equivalent to like a TJ Maxx or something like that, where you go in and you're looking for bargains. They operated about 308 stores and they are defunct. Their original website is captured on Web Archives if you ever want to learn a little bit about Ames. It's optimized for Netscape 2.0.
Oh, beautiful.
So that's where our family would shop, because it was also for the frugally minded person. My memories about the Game Gear were that we had one. It was heavy, and it would play a game for about 10 minutes, and then it would die.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
I remember the Sonic game had a mine level.
Yeah,
that was really
that's
tough.
the first one. Yeah, that's the first level.
You can't get out of it or beat it. It's really hard.
Yeah, fun fact about that: the Sonic game for the Game Gear, at least the second one that we had, is not optimized for the Game Gear, and we'll talk about that a little later. How a lot of games are ported over from the Master System, which was designed to go on your television screen, which is much larger than the fairly small Game Gear screen. So the games were sometimes not optimized to run on a smaller screen, which the Sonic game suffered from. The final boss was like impossible for that. Going into the Game Gear began life under a development title of Project Mercury. Sega really liked using planet names for their project titles. Well, I mean, they released the Saturn, but they also were working on a console called the Neptune at one point. And they had a project in line for Sonic that they called Sonic Mars. So they definitely have like a
planet motif
when it comes to development stuff. And as one can infer, at least even by the name and by the concept of a portable gaming system, it was done pretty much just to compete with the Nintendo Game Boy. The Game Boy came out in 1989. The Game Gear came out in the 90s. So there you have it. Sega's then CEO, Hayao Nakayama, made the decision to enter the handheld market solely so they could compete. I mean, he saw that Game Boy was doing well, and he was like, hey, I want that.
Which already puts you at a disadvantage.
Right, yeah.
So you see these people come to market with, so first of all, that surprises me that no one at Sega knew that Nintendo was developing a Game Boy before the Game Boy came out in 89. Like, why wasn't it like 87, 86, right, when there was rumblings of Game Boy making Game Boys, that Sega should have tried to get first to market, or at least closely behind, but being like, oh, what year did the Game Gear actually release?
1990 in Japan and 91 in North America.
Yeah, so they were kind of behind. So they had to have some inkling that it was coming out. But to be like, oh, the Game Boy came out, and then like a year later release yours.
Yeah.
Or almost 2 years later release in North America. Now Game Boy already has a year or two of sale. Like, they know kind of like how their Game Boy is
had
doing.
A foothold, yeah.
Not only that, but how to make it better.
Right, yeah.
And as we learned with the Game Boy, we got the Game Boy Color, and the Game Boy got slimmer, it got lighter, you got smaller Game Boy formats, where Sega entered the market with this gigantic thing. Yes, they had color before, but it was not as portable, I think.
Right. The fact that the Game Gear came out the way it did, it was 100% rushed to market. And to do this, when you rush something to market, you have to make cost-cutting decisions, which aren't always a good idea.
Correct.
One of the first cost-cutting decisions that they made, which actually I don't think was a bad cost-cutting decision was basing the architecture off the Game Gear on a pre-existing console. So they based the architecture on the Game Gear on the Sega Master System. Basically what that means was that they used a modified version of the hardware to create their handheld. The Sega Master System, we'll talk about maybe in a future episode, wasn't a super big success for Sega, but it was one of their earliest game systems. Kind of was like a slightly more powerful Nintendo, or like original Nintendo, but
it wasn't no Genesis.
It was no Genesis. But basing your hardware on something that was previously in existence is great for a number of reasons. For one, it's familiarity, and for two, you can easily bring over titles from that previous machine onto this new one. The Game Gear, though, was a slightly more beefier in terms of what it could do versus what the Master System could do. For one thing, the Game Gear had a much larger color palette. It had about 4,096 colors, as opposed to the 64 colors that the Master System could do. So this was also already superior to the Game Boy because the Game Gear was a color system. And Game Boy was only monochrome. It was actually green monochrome. It wasn't like black and white. It was this green tint. Another thing that Game Gear had that Game Boy didn't have was a backlight. Your Game Gear games you could play in the dark. You could turn on your Game Gear and the light would be there and it would be on. It also had a contrast slider so that you could actually adjust it if you wanted to hold it in different positions to allow the backlight to work properly from different angles. With this backlight and the color screen, the Game Gear was already a much more powerful system than the Game Boy. But with great power comes a great cost, to paraphrase Uncle Ben. The Game Gear had a terrible battery life. Let's put it in perspective right now. The Game Boy could run 30 hours on 4 AA batteries. Meaning you pop in 4 AA batteries, you put in your copy of Tetris, and you turned it on, you could just put it down, and it would sit there for 30 hours. The Game Gear required 6 AA batteries and could only run up to 3 to 5 hours.
I think that brings in a couple of things in play right there. First of all, batteries aren't cheap. They're an expensive commodity to buy. And these batteries, as they are, generally are not rechargeable unless you have some special equipment to recharge them. But you generally, the standard consumer buys batteries as a disposable product. You needed to buy a 12-pack of batteries to run your Game Gear for 6 hours.
Right, yeah. Which, like, if you're going on a long car trip, what would you rather have? A system that could last 30 hours that you don't have to worry about? Or the Game Gear?
Right. That's a pack of batteries for 6 hours. That's a trip to Maine and back.
I remember going on trips with my Game Gear and having a bag of batteries, like, in a, like, separate packed with me, just in case, you know?
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Where the Game Boy, you could forget to bring batteries at all.
You could buy a rechargeable nickel-cadmium battery pack, which was expensive, first of all. And also, that added plenty of heft to the already beefy system. So you already have a kind of brick of a system, and then you're strapping on this like extra brick to it. Really not ideal for even the minimum of additional battery life that could support. The game library also suffered. So Nintendo made it to market first. And when you make it to market first, you get first dibs on especially third-party developers. So Nintendo has already signed contracts with third-party developers who are signing exclusivity deals with Nintendo so that they couldn't create games for the Game Gear, even if they wanted to. You had games coming out for the Game Boy that could have probably come out for the Game Gear, but due to exclusivity deals and contracts such as that, they were never going to come out. Only 300 or so titles were released worldwide for the Game Gear, and some titles were region restricted. So some titles only came out in Japan, some titles only came out in North America, etc. So in reality, you had, depending on your region, you had less than 300 or so titles to pick from. Now, some titles were directly ported over from the Master System. As mentioned, they're built on similar architecture, so porting them over didn't require too much effort. Really, the one thing you had to do was you had to change your screen size, so the games would be slightly impacted because they would have smaller screen real estate, but for the most part, were fairly accurate ports to their Master System counterparts. This includes some Master System titles such as the 8-bit version of Sonic the Hedgehog and Sonic the Hedgehog 2. There's also a game called Sonic Chaos, which was exclusive to the Master System and the Game Gear. And there was a Land of Illusion starring Mickey Mouse, which was a pretty good title. There are also ports of Sega Genesis games, and these had to be reworked considerably because these were 16-bit games looking to work on 8-bit hardware. So they had to completely remake some of the games. This included like the Disney's Aladdin game that I played, which was originally released on the Sega Genesis, or a version of Rystar, which was a great game. There was also an optional Master Gear converter, which allowed you to play any Master System game cartridge. I specifically say game cartridge because the Master System actually came out on both cartridges and these like cards that kind of looked like little credit cards that you could insert into the system. This converter did not allow you to play cards. It was just the cartridge-based games, which was the majority of titles. But I mean, that's not really portability, is it? I mean, if you think about something like the Game Boy and its vastly bigger library of games, you could easily carry maybe 10 Game Boy games in a backpack or your pockets without much room for worry, you know? Especially someone maybe like younger. So maybe like little Zach in his cargo pants could have fit a Game Boy in one pocket and a stack of games in the other pocket. If you're carrying Master System games, these are for a home console. That's not portability. And they looked chunky coming out of this thing. Obviously not ideal. Now, along with the games, there were also some interesting accessories that were unique to the Game Gear. There was a notable thing called the TV tuner. It was expensive, but it did allow you to tune into analog television signals, which was kind of cool. I mean, you could make use of your Game Gear and watch some TV. There are also power adapters for cigarette lighter ports in the car. So going with, a complaint, if you're driving to Maine, you could either bring 12 batteries or you could buy the power adapter that you could plug directly into the car cigarette lighter port, which was an option available. There's also a data cable that you could get that allowed for multiplayer, very similar to the Link cable, which was available for the Game Boy.
Which I also think that if you have to plug in your product everywhere
it's
you
not
go,
portable.
It's not really portable.
Yeah, it defeats the purpose.
The Game Gear was released in Japan on October 6th of 1990, and it did actually pretty well. It sold about 40,000 units in its first 2 days, and up to 90,000 units within a month. And there was also reportedly back orders upwards of 600,000 units after its original release. However, as we've learned in the past, Sega Japan and Sega America tend to do things a little differently, and Sega America doesn't always get the best of the best over from Japan and tend to be disaligned with its parent company. And the marketing in America was bad, and it did not do well because of it. The marketing in America was not just bad, it was also sometimes downright offensive, where they were making fun of people with disabilities and health issues, where they would try to compare, saying that you would buy a Game Boy if you were colorblind or had an IQ of less than 12. And then you wouldn't care what portable you had because they were saying you were stupid for buying a Game Boy instead of a Game Gear because of the difference in power that the Game Gear had. It really offending people is probably not the best way to convince somebody to buy your product.
No. Not at all.
And by March of 1996, the system had sold about 10.62 million units, though was never able to make it to the same level of sales as Nintendo's Game Boy, which I think we also are due to do an episode on as well.
And I forgot to include the note, but for reference, the Game Boy was doing about 10 times better than the Game Gear was by 96. So
the Game Boy was doing 100 million at a clip, where the Sega Game Gear was getting up around 10.6. Also, as soon as the Game Gear was released, as we spoke earlier, or speculated earlier, Nintendo released the Game Boy Pocket, which was slimmed down from the Game Boy that you could run on 2 AAA batteries, which was cheaper in the long run. If you wanted a portable game system, it was cheaper in the long run to buy the Game Boy completely versus the Game Gear, especially since the Game Gear, on release, retailed for $149.99, which the Game Boy was selling for $89.99, and the Pocket Game Boy was selling for $69.99.
Yeah.
Not only did it cost you more money to buy the Game Gear, it also cost you more money to run the Game Gear. Let's do some napkin math here. Let's assume, for the purpose of this napkin math, I'm basing buying batteries at a 24 pack for $16. Just based on some quick Googling, kind of that's where I'm falling in at. At the end of the day, that's about 65 cents a battery, which we'll use that as just our standard. And we're going to use the same 65 cents for AAA or AA. Doesn't matter. 65 cents a battery. So for you to run 30 hours of the Game Boy, it would cost you 4 batteries to do so. The cost of 4 batteries is $2.60. $92.60 gets you a Game Boy, probably gets you a game, and gets you 30 hours of gameplay. For $70 plus $1.30, you can get a Game Boy Pocket and you can get 30 hours of gameplay. Now, if you wanted 30 hours out of the Game Gear, it would cost you $30.25 to run 6 AA batteries at 4 hours a set for 30 hours. That's 7.5 times you have to switch out the batteries. So on top of the $150 price tag, you're looking at $180 to play the same amount of time, to buy a Game Gear, get the free game that comes with it, hopefully, and to get the 30 hours of gameplay that your friends are playing on the Game Boy, with probably a less popular IP, because Pokemon and Final Fantasy were all on the Game Boys and were very good. So yeah, $180 versus $71. So you could buy 2 Game Boys.
Yeah.
And have 2 people play those 2 Game Boys for 36. You can play 2 Game Boys and in fact play 60 hours for the cost of 1 Game Gear.
Not bad.
And the hours associated with it. So in 2000, however, there was a company called Majesco who began developing cheaper versions of the Game Gear and retailed them in 2000 for $30, since it was also no longer supported by Sega. Since then, Game Gear games have also been released on a variety of other systems, such as the 3DS Virtual Console through Nintendo.
Love it.
For the 60th anniversary of the company, Sega revealed the Game Gear Micro console in Japan. They are keychain devices that play a few games from the library. The Micro measures 3 1/14 of an inch by 1.69 of an inch by 0.79 inch with a 1.1 inch display, which is very tiny, very micro.
It is actually kind of adorable looking. Definitely not the way to play the Game Gear. Like, if you want to play Game Gear games, there is certainly better ways to play it, but if you are a Game Gear enthusiast, then have at it.
I think it'd be fun. How much do those keychains go for?
Let's actually take a look real quick. They're only in Japan at the moment. I don't think they've come over to the States yet. I think they're like $50. So, Sega was not quite done with the handheld market, though they probably should have been. While it wasn't the Game Gear 2, Sega did release something called the Nomad, which was their second attempt to capture this market at a lot later of a time. So, unlike the Game Gear, which was, though based on the Master System, still a new system. I mean, the games had to be reworked. These weren't straight over, you weren't playing Master System games unless you had the converter with the Game Gear cartridges. The Nomad was literally a Sega Genesis. 100%, just a Sega Genesis that was stripped down into a portable form factor. So the original concept for the Nomad actually was born out of a 1994 Japanese exclusive console called the Mega Jet. Now, the Mega Jet was a Sega Genesis, or rather, Sega Mega Drive, that could be hooked up to a television screen on the Japanese airline flights. And it was powered by a cigarette lighter port, which, that's good. That's good that you are using the cigarette lighter port on your airline to play video games and not to smoke. Don't smoke on the airline. Bad idea to smoke on planes. The Mega Jet itself actually looks more similar to a Game Gear. It just completely lacked a screen, so it was just hookups. And separate from the Game Gear, it played Genesis games or Mega Drive games. Now, the Mega Jet wasn't really a success for Sega, but they did like this idea of a portable Sega Genesis, so they wanted to create what would become the Nomad using this idea. The Nomad is actually fully compatible with a majority of Sega Genesis titles and other peripherals, such as the Mega Mouse, which is the mouse peripheral that you don't really use for anything, I think. The Sega Channel Network add-on, which was a separate cartridge that you could plug in and hook up to your phone line so you could play some network games, and various controllers and stuff like that, like the Activator, which was like a motion controller. Didn't work, but they had it.
Sounds like most of Sega's products.
However, the Nomad was not compatible with the Sega CD, the 32X, or the Power Base Converter, which was a tool that allowed Master System games to be played on a Sega Genesis. This meant that the Nomad would have to just stick to Sega Genesis titles, which isn't a terrible thing. The Nomad was also only released in North America, which is why I keep saying Sega Genesis, because in North America it was the Genesis, it wasn't the Mega Drive. So this wasn't a Sega Mega Drive handheld, this was a Sega Genesis. There were no European or Japanese Nomads.
So now, wanting to play Sega Genesis games, especially in the late 90s on the go, may seem like something that would be cool and appealing. I mean, people do that now with Raspberry Pis on the go. They play some Sega Genesis games. Or on your phone, you play some Sega Genesis games. But the Nomad did have some compatibility issues with some early third-party games. It also prevented any games from the non-US market from being played, so only US titles, because it was regionally locking everybody else out. And Sega did not learn from the Game Gear.
No.
And it had about 2 to 3 hours of battery life with a whopping 6 AA batteries requirement. So let me tell you, 6 AA batteries are hefty when you're trying to play a game on the go. The system sold between 1995 and 1999, and only 1 million units were reportedly bought. On the release, the system was sold for $180. And by 1999, this was dropped to $60.
Not terrible.
Sega just doesn't get it. They just don't understand. And I mean, which is why they're predominantly out of the console market. Sega also didn't really heavily market the Nomad, as at the time they were really focused on the release of the Sega Saturn and didn't have any push to market what was going to be an obsolete system overall.
I think to Sega, it was like, at least to the people who were marketing in North America, it was like, why? Like, we have a Saturn coming out, which is going to be better than the Genesis, right? I mean, it wasn't, but it could have been. And why would they market obsolete tech that was destined to fail, almost?
Right. And we talk about this in our Sega Saturn episode, where essentially Sega Japan was working on the Sega Saturn and Sega America was working on the 32X.
Yeah.
And the Nomad, like Sega America was like, we got this cool Nomad, we got this cool 32X, we got all these cool systems, but why aren't we getting the budget to market them? And Japan's like, we're working on Sega Saturn.
Yeah, we're good.
Which is nothing to do with the cartridge-based system anymore. We're leaving that behind and we're moving towards the future. And Sega America's like, let's do this. We're going to make this Nomad thing and we're going to sell it for $180 and we're not selling anything. And the disconnection between the two companies in America and Japan it's so stark when it comes to these releases, especially towards the later end of the 90s. And at the end of the 90s and moving into the 2000s, you can really see the disconnection and the fragmentation between Sega of Japan and Sega of America. And how they just didn't talk to each other and weren't aligned, but still release things under the same umbrella, the same brand.
It's weird because they feel like they're separate companies. Almost.
They are. They really are. They are separate companies that just they're like a franchise of Sega of Japan. And, like the franchise owners just running around doing whatever they want. And it's just like if you had like a Subway, but instead of Subway, you sold pizza.
Yeah.
You're like, I own a Subway franchise, so I'm making Subway, but when you come in, it's an Italian pizzeria, and you're like, what? I don't understand. Like, you go in as a consumer of Subway thinking you're going to get a sandwich, and then you are delivered a pizza. And that's essentially what's going on with Sega of America and Sega of Japan. You look for a Sega product, and you get the 32X, or you get the Nomad, and you're like, what is this?
I can almost see what Sega was kind of, or at least Sega of America was kind of thinking, at least with the Nomad, because they released the 32X in 94, so a year before the Nomad. And like, I can totally see Sega of America people sitting down and being like, oh, it's going to be a good year to be a Genesis fan. First off, you got the 32X, which is a way to expand your library on the Genesis. And the year after, we're giving you the Nomad so you can take those games on the go. And meanwhile, Sega of Japan was like, what? Like, why? Like, we've got a better thing coming out. It's going to be better. Alas, that was Sega and their attempt at creating the handheld game systems.
Twice.
They learned their lesson and did not release any more. But to be fair,
I don't know. They don't think they did learn their lesson because they released another one.
They never learned. Sega does not learn their lesson. This obviously will not be the last time we talk about Sega nor their hardware. The thing with Sega is I love them dearly, but they had one good system, and that was it. Like, they had a cool system, which was the Dreamcast, and then they had a successful system, which was the Genesis, and nothing else. Everything else was pretty much an abject failure. I love Sega, and they'll always have my heart, but they are a mess. So we will obviously mention the Master System later in maybe a later episode. It wasn't a system that Seth and I grew up with, so we don't have as many memories of it. But we wanted to tell you guys a bit about the Game Gear and our memories of it and this little oddity known as the Nomad. Because honestly, when else are we going to talk about the Nomad, right?
But we do have the Sega Master System in the plans to talk about later on in the year. And we will, if people are interested in hearing about the Sega Master sooner rather than later, send us an email and we can definitely kick it up on the schedule.
Yeah, we're going to get into our Buy Wait Pass section right now. So this is the section where we talk about games that we are interested in buying, waiting, or passing on. Seth, as you did your recently played first, I'm going to do my Buy Wait Pass first. So my Buy Wait Pass is going to be Age of Empires 4. Age of Empires 4 by Relic Entertainment. So Age of Empires 4 was originally revealed back in 2019 via some gameplay footage that was showed at an event, and it's the official follow-up to the popular Age of Empires franchise. The game looks to be an update to the familiar gameplay of the previous Age of Empire games, which are real-time strategy games very similar to that of the Westwood titles from like Command & Conquer or the Blizzard titles like Warcraft. Maybe someday we'll do a whole thing on Age of Empires. Age of Empires 4 looks beautiful, at least from the early gameplay footage I've seen of it from the 2019 reveal trailer. However, we haven't really heard too much about it since then. They still have their website up, so I don't think it's been canceled. At least I hope it's not. But in any case, it's rumored to be coming out this year, 2021. I will probably wait. I love Age of Empires, and the reason I want to wait is because I just want to kind of figure out how the early reviews are. The company Relic Entertainment, I'm sure they've done some pretty good games before. I think they actually worked on a couple of the Warhammer games, a couple of the RTS Warhammer games, and they also worked on Company of Heroes, which is a good real-time strategy game. So I'm sure it's in good hands, but obviously with a franchise like Age of Empires, a franchise that I'm very fond of, I kind of want to see how other people react to it before I pick it up. I probably will grab it, but at least for the time being, I'm going to put it down as a wait. We'll keep my eye out on it.
The game that I'm excited about buying, waiting, or passing on is a game called The Shore. It is a game that actually came out and was developed and published by Ares Dragonis and came out very recently as of February 19th of 2021. And it is a first-person story-driven game with an atmospheric environment and narration where you will encounter mysterious creatures and unravel the secrets behind them. It's got really strong horror elements and the struggle to go up against like an unknown world which questions your sanity. So very Lovecraftian and very like Call of Cthulhu, which I do as well. I actually played all of Call of Cthulhu, which took me about 40 hours and was really, really enjoyable. I really liked the Call of Cthulhu game, the new-ish one. And if it's like that game, I probably will like it. It is a small indie development team, or it does look like it's a smaller team, so they probably won't have the Lovecraftian license, but I think it's an open, can you just use it?
Yeah, so Lovecraft stuff is public domain.
Yeah, so they could use it.
Yeah, I think as long as you are careful with it. So obviously you don't want to have like a Call of Cthulhu story that's really similar to the like established Call of Cthulhu RPG or adventure game.
Unless you get sign
off and stuff like that. But like you could technically just put out a Lovecraft title without much worry.
So it's cool. So it's probably going to have some Lovecraftian stuff into it. I'm going to put it down at a wait. I generally have horror moods where I get into a state where I play a lot of horror games and then I don't play them for a while. So I'm in my off season right now. Generally around spooky time, around October is when I start playing a lot of them. But you never know. The mood might hit me. But I'm going to put it down as a wait until I kind of see how it does and until that mood strikes me. But if you like Lovecraftian type horror games, maybe you should check it out. Not you, Zach, but you, the listener. Or I would recommend checking out Call of Cthulhu, the game. So if you like horror themed type stuff, Call of Cthulhu, or maybe the shore. So there's those games. So yeah, we always like to end with having ways where you can contact us, support us, or listen to us. So some of the ways that you can contact us, you can send us an email at classicgamingbrothers@gmail.com. You can also send it to Seth at classicgamingbrothers.com, Zach at classicgamingbrothers.com, or classicgamingbrothers@classicgamingbrothers.com. Send it all, it goes to the same email box. If you want to use a website form, because why not, you can head over to our website, which is classicgamingbrothers.com. And at that website, there'll be a contact button. While you're there, that gets into our next topic. You can listen to us, which I think it was the next topic. Completely forgotten what the order of the were in to begin with.
I'm going to say it's the next topic.
So you go and you can listen to us, and you can head over to the lounge where you can listen to us and maybe turn on some Classic Gaming Brothers, turn the lights, dim the lights, sit back in a cozy chair and just listen to us and probably fall asleep, because if you listen to us to help you get to sleep, that's fine. We'll take that. But if you listen to us to enjoy the content, great. You can also, if you don't feel like listening to us on our website, you can listen to us on any number of podcasting apps. We're available, to name a few, iHeartRadio, iTunes, and Spotify. Those are a few. And a few more. So just check us out. You can check any listening app that you use. I'm sure you use one. And just search Classic Gaming Brothers. And you will inevitably find us. And if you don't find us, you can always let us know what app you've tried to find us on, you couldn't, and we will get on it, or try to at least. NPR, we're still trying to become an NPR station.
Yeah,
so
I am waiting for my NPR affiliate official letter in the mail.
Official NPR affiliate. Well, finally, how you can support us? You really want to support us? You like the podcast? Well, we don't necessarily ask for your money. We just ask for your heart. And well, not like Indiana Jones asked for your heart. We ask for just to lend us an ear, or maybe help other people lend you an ear.
Like Van Gogh.
We produce all this content by ourselves, as evident by the quality. And
what are you talking about? We got a team of writers. 1,000 monkeys.
We need to fire them. We need to fire those writers. Seriously though, we produce this stuff by ourselves. It is a hobby of ours, so it's not like we're not going to make a living out of this, and we're not going to charge you for this. So you will always get our content free of charge. We have no intention of ever charging for this as a service, and we have no intention of ever asking for money. But if you want to support us and you're desperate to support us, there's some things you can do. You could rate us, review us, and listen to us on whatever application you use. Probably the number one thing that you can do for us is to give us a good rating on whatever service you use, and to write up a review or something that you like the show. You can send us feedback. We love having feedback in episodes. That'd be great as well. And honestly, those are probably the top things that we would want you to do. You could also listen to you can listen to more episodes. That's also a good thing. If there's an episode that you haven't listened to, I'm looking at you, arcade episode about Pong, Pac-Man, and Donkey Kong. That episode needs some love. So go on, check that episode out if you haven't listened to it already. It's a good one. Well, it's
not bad.
It's good. I like it. It's a good episode. It's interesting. It covers some things that are new to the show. So, check out those episodes that you haven't checked out. That's another thing you can do to support us. And honestly, just letting your friends know and following us on social media. We have a Facebook. You can like and subscribe. We have an Instagram, and we have a Twitter. So our Facebook and Instagram are Classic Gaming Brothers. Our Twitter is CG Brothers Pod. And then we also have a Twitch where we'll play games. You can follow us there, and that's twitch.tv/Classic Gaming Brothers. So just Google us, and I'm sure you can find our stuff. But really, just getting to this part of the episode and listening to these words is support enough for us, and we appreciate you here. It's a fun journey to be on. We like producing this content, and we will produce more. And as long as there's people listening, we'll keep making episodes of Classic Gaming Brothers. We'll maybe change the format up a little bit. We maybe change some ideas, but I think we will continue to make a show for you and try to get it to you on Sunday, which we have not failed yet. So
knock on wood.
Knock on wood. So far, we've hit every episode. And so with that, Zach, is there anything else that I'm missing?
Something that we're missing. I mean, you went over so many good topics. Wait a second. Oh, there is. Hold on. I'm letting the joke go too far. Don't play games like my brother.
And don't play games like my brother.
I've been Zach.
And I've been Seth.
And we've been the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right.
And like Sega.
All right.
I'm calling this one
Good
night.
Yeah. I think they called it good night on themselves when they released the Nomad for $180. Good night. Good night.